Good evening and welcome. My name is Alessandra Menegon. I am the Deputy Director for Operations for the International Committee of the Red Cross, and I'm really honored this evening to moderate this panel on cross-border demining. I am not an expert of the sector, but I have spent the most part of my 30 years career in the ICRC in the field. And if there is one thing that I have learned is how astonishingly easy it is to start a war and how complex is actually to achieve peace. But what is even more complex is how to make peace sustainable, durable. And I have to say that peace becomes sustainable once the population can project themselves into the future. And this is what demining actually do, I think. What demining or the removal of explosive hazards do is that they give back safety, they give back dignity to the people of a country because they are able to restart their economic life and so to look into the future. But what makes peace even more durable is when the two countries or the two sides that have actually been engaged in war manage to remove this wall, which is not a wall, which is the mining between the two countries. And I have to say that while demining in itself is an extremely complex endeavor in any country, cross-border demining gets the problem to a completely different level, much more complex. It requires technical expertise, it requires diplomacy, political will, it requires effort to build trust among the parties, and a lot of coordination. It's an endeavor that builds on the knowledge of what the mining operations have developed in different countries, but it takes it to a different level. There have been studies that have been made on this specific endeavor by the ICRC, by the Geneva Center for Humanitarian Demining, and today we have gathered a panel of experts that will share with us the challenges, the specific challenges of cross-border demining, but as well the good practice, and somehow will explain to us how this is feasible, not only through rigor and work, but as well through an effort of thinking sometimes out of the box. So we have today with us, and I start from here from my colleague, we have the head of the weapon contamination unit for the ICRC, Erik Tollefsen. Then we had Captain Godwish from Zimbabwe. He is the operating manager of the Zimbabwean Mine Action Center. Welcome as well to Svenja Liu, which is a program officer at the Geneva International Center for Humanitarian Demining. And last but not least, Axel Steen Nielsen, sorry for my pronunciation, is the director of the Department of Mine Action and Disarmament at the Norwegian People's Aid. So, thank you to all of you. We will start with you, Erik. You will present the work that has been done and developed by the ICRC and by your team on guidelines for cross-border demining.
Thank you so much, Alessandra. Can you all hear me? Wonderful. Thank you so much for coming and attending this side event on this important topic. I see so many dignitaries, Mr. President, so many directors and high-level colleagues in this room, so I'm really honored. And thank you, Alessandra, for moderating this session for us. This is truly a subject that is of importance, and I should say, sadly, it's getting more and more important for every day that passes. Landmines laid among either de facto or legal borders, international borders, accounts for more than 30 in 30 states worldwide. Historically, clearance of cross-border minefields has often suffered long delays owing to the needs to maintain political will of both sides of the border, or down to challenging security situations, or the challenge of finding funding, international funding for these type of projects. This guide, and we've left a few copies here by the door for when you leave the room. We will also display a QR code so you can pick up your smartphone and download it instantly. It's quite a recent one. We had a presentation during the review conference in CMREP in December last year, but it's still almost fresh off the press. It's intended to advance the clearance of landmines for border areas when, as I mentioned, there's a political will. More specifically, it's meant to inform affected states as well as donor states of some of the various approaches and frameworks for planning and implementing cross-border or near-border demining activities. We didn't want to go solo when making this publication. We really wanted to ground it with expertise. So we reached out to the Institute for International and Comparable Law in Pretoria in South Africa. We had Professor Stuart Maslin, who's heading this institute, helping us with this study. So we were really grateful for that. And then we had from the UK Remedy and Mr. Daniel Perkins, who was also great to have, who brought in a lot of intellectual capacity when we were drafting this study, with the experience from our colleagues that are working in field programs. The guide is divided into four main sections. The first section focusing on international law and treaties and rules, including the pertinent ones that we're discussing in this meeting, so the Anti-Personnel Mine Ban Convention, the Convention on Cluster Munitions. The second section sets out the principles and frameworks for interstate cooperation and border demining, including the possible structures and key components of cross-border demining projects at both the national and international, interstate levels. Alessandra mentioned, that thinking out of the box can be useful from time to time. And that's what we tried to do here. So we brought in experience from other projects that has been run successfully outside the mine action sector. So we looked, for instance, at the Eurotunnel concept, how two nation states, in this case it's the United Kingdom and France, how they could cooperate and agree on something as complex of building an international tunnel underwater. We also looked at other projects where states have been able to cooperate by building a motorway or a bridge between the two countries, whereas the issue with landmines have not been solved. So we wanted to take inspiration from this side. The third section of the guide emphasizes the importance of documenting and to reporting on cross-border demining, for instance, onto Article 5 reporting. I see we have the director of the ISU of the APMC here, so I'm sure he's taking note now as I speak. Which is, of course, covering the benefits acquired from the demining and also the lesson learned during the project, so that we can project that over to others and help other nation states build success and avoid unnecessary mistakes. The fourth and the final section is for those with a more operational hat on in this room, which talks about, and we formed it as an operational checklist with the main thinking and the toolbox approach to this type of projects. And I'll come back to that in a moment. When we talk about projects, we need to also have that kind of view on why. Why do we do this? And of course, in terms of cross-border demining, there's a lot of benefits coming out of it. And I would say that the benefits are significant. One is, of course, the safety of local communities that will be improved and enhanced. There's a common misconception around the issue of mine borders, that they actually provide safety. And we've heard that maybe lately with that change in security situation in Europe, that some states are referring to, you know, border security and that will increase safety of the population. But what we found is that, it makes borders less secure than rather secure, and particularly for the personnel charged with protecting the frontier. But also with nomadic people, with worshippers that are on pilgrimage, shepherds, and other civilians that are living near the border or across the border. Second, there might also be an economic boost resulting from a successful border demining, as new trade and transport routes open up between nations. And this can, of course, benefit also local communities, which can more easily engage in trade and commerce. On a larger scale, demining can also improve transport connectivity and support post-conflict recovery of the agriculture sector. Third, the demining of border areas offers major opportunity to build confidence and trust between neighboring states. The process of negotiating, agreeing, and implementing cross and near-border clearance can help create a climate of trust and cooperation, which in turn can serve to de-escalate the current or lingering tensions. It can advance reconciliation and strengthen peace and security. And this is something that is needed in these days. It can also have benefits for the countries involved as well as broader positive impacts for security and stability in the region. In short, cross-border demining is a global good that generates benefits for communities, societies, and economies, as well as enhancing local, regional, and international peace and security efforts. I left it as a bit of a cliffhanger that I would kind of now take my more operational hat on, because we did look at operational aspects. And in the publication, you will find quite a detailed list of factors that we have been considering, you know, from all our experience, which has been fed in from all our experts in the field. Firstly, we need to think that every situation is unique. And we need to look at the context-specific analysis, assess the situation individually, and do this early in the planning phase. We've seen so many times that organizations or nation states, they just bring across a package from a previous job. Don't do that. You know, go in, assess, analyze, consult. Also, security challenges. If early on in the project we address security challenges, we consult, we can avoid a lot of the problems to come. And as I mentioned, you know, later on, we will be able to build trust. We will be able to help peace, but it's very important that this is being communicated early on in the project. Also, please consider the full spectrum of the mine action toolbox, enable to find the best approach to each specific context in order to make sure that the clearance is safe, is fast, and cost efficient. Also, having experienced staff is important. And if you don't have that staff yourself, please consider bringing in someone with that expertise. Maybe an organization that can come and help you that have done this before. But it's not just on, you know, the clearance part, but also in terms of community liaison, in terms of having a gender-balanced team. And we looked into, for instance, experiences that was learned in Denmark during the clearance of the Skallingen Peninsula. And Bo Bischoff, who many of you will know, who was the director of that project, when I was visiting at the time, he said that the biggest challenge for the project was not the technical one, but it was liaising with the community, because there were so many armchair specialists out there who knew better. And finally, and I'm summing up here, is to dare to visit other successful projects. There's so much you can learn by taking part of your team, maybe part of a team from each side of this border context, and travel to a third or fourth country and learning from their experience, and thereby coming back and having a better view, being better prepared in terms of how long it will take, what kind of resources is needed, and how to do proper reporting. So with that, just would like to encourage you, if you want to sit in front of your fireplace with a pipe, smoking pipe, for those that smoke pipes in here, I know there's at least one, and have a look at this guide. There will not be a YouTube version. This is it, and I hope you find it useful. So thank you so much.
Eric, thank you. Thank you very much, Eric. And I have to say that I've gone through this brochure a couple of times, and there are three things that I think this study brings to us. First is really the importance of thinking through the structure of the project from the beginning and choosing the best one to the context. And you give the different examples. Another 2 points that is really important to repeat here is the community, liaise with the community, learn and listen to them, because at the end of the day, these operations are done for the community, in the interest of the community, and the importance of documenting to improve the next iteration, to help other countries to do it even more efficiently than what it has been done in a given country. And with this transition, I pass the floor to Captain Godwish, who will bring to us the experience, the very concrete experience of Zimbabwe, and as ICRC has the pleasure as well to have accompanied part of this route done by Zimbabwe. So we go now from theory to practice, and the floor is to you, Captain.
Thank you. Good afternoon, everyone. My name is Captain Godwish Machemedze from Zimbabwe Mine Action Center. I'm the Acting Operations Officer at Zimbabwe Mine Action Center. I would like to thank Alexander for granting me this opportunity to share with you the outstanding progress in clearing mines from Zimbabwe borders, challenges faced, practices, and innovations used to overcome these challenges. As a way of introduction, the landmine problem in Zimbabwe can be traced back to the War of Liberation of Zimbabwe, which culminated in the attainment of independence in 1980. At the peak of the liberation struggle from 1976 to 1979, the Rhodesian Army laid minefields along northern and eastern borders of Zimbabwe with the aim of preventing and infiltrating of freedom fighters into the country from Zambia and Mozambique. It is estimated that nearly 3 million anti-personnel mines were laid along borders and mostly inland, with some over 5 kilometers inland, as shown on the slide there. There are two pictures that are shown on the map. The first map, it shows the minefields that were laid, that were inherited by Zimbabwe soon after independence, and those minefields were laid along border boundaries, save for an inland minefield which is in Matabeleland North in Ilusulu. Then the second map, it shows that minefields were laid inland of Zimbabwe, not exactly in the border boundaries, as shown there. The yellow line maps is the border boundaries, and the green line shows the stretch of the minefields. So in Zimbabwe, the minefields are not laid exactly in the border boundaries. Overall progress and remaining contamination in Zimbabwe. The Zimbabwe demining program is progressing well, built behind schedule, as the country strives to fulfill its obligation of mine-free, although the 25 deadline seems unattainable. Work remains on 4 of the country's provinces, which is Masvingo province, Mashonaland Central, Mash East, and Matabeleland North, which is an inland minefield. Much clearance has so far been done along the borders with Mozambique to allow learners to access schools and health facilities, as shown on the slide there. As you can see, the children are trying to navigate through the minefields from their homes to school, and they are passing through the minefields which were laid along the border boundaries. Remaining contamination in Zimbabwe. Initially, Zimbabwe inherited the initial contamination was 310,650,000 square meters, and the area released is shown on the slide there, and we are remaining as at and the remaining contamination as at 31 January 2025 stands at 11,784,069 square meters, covering 4 provinces, and only 797,363 square meters is not along the borders, as I earlier on stipulated. From the above statistics, it is now certain that the deadline, the 2025 deadline, is no longer achievable. As such, Zimbabwe submitted an additional extension period. Initially, we had a deadline of Zimbabwe landmine free by 2025, but now it's no longer achievable. Impact of mine clearance on border communities. Safety and protection of civilians. Mine clearance directly reduces the risk of injuries and facilities among innocent local populations, thereby enabling safer movement within affected areas. People living adjacent to minefields will now have their safety will be guaranteed through through demining, since the area that they are living will be free of landmines. Cross-border access to health facilities. People that are living adjacent to border boundaries, they will be having or accessing health facilities from Zimbabwean side to Mozambican side, or vice versa. People in Mozambique will be accessing health facilities in Zimbabwe. For example, in Mukumbura, whereby the Mukumbura border was being cleared, the mine action Mozambique were accessing health facilities in Karanda, in Zimbabwean side. Access to resources. Demining provides access to services such as hospitals and clinics to provide living adjacent to minefields, since they will be forced to cross borders looking for health facilities. Tourism and wildlife conservation. As you can see on the pictures on the slide there, is the Great Limpopo Frontier Park, whereby the Gonare-Joe National Park in Zimbabwe side is still having contaminated, and the Mozambican side is now free from landmines, and the South African side is now free from landmines, thereby impacting wildlife. For example, elephants crossing from the safe area from Mozambique or from South Africa, coming to Zimbabwe, to Gonare-Joe National Park, where there is a lot of landmines. Community development. Increased safety and access can lead to improved infrastructure and services, benefiting education and health care. After a clearing of landmines along border boundaries, people will be accessing infrastructure. There will be reconstruction of roads for ease accessibility. Then I'll move on to cross-border trading. Cross-border trading trading in Zimbabwe between Mozambique and Zimbabwe is a thing which is at its peak, since people are moving from Mozambican side, looking for maybe trying to trade. They move from Mozambican side to Zimbabwean side, trying to purchase goods and services, and vice versa. So this is facilitated through a cross-border clearing. Challenges faced by Zimbabwe in clearing minefields. Funding limitation. One of the primary challenges is the lack of sufficient funding for mine clearance operation. Many organizations rely on international donations, which can be inconsistent. Fluctuating donor interest can lead to inconsistent funding levels, thereby reducing and retarding a clearance pace in the country. A typical example was the withdrawal of support by all humanitarian activities by the US through the WRA, which impacted Apopo, which was clearing the Crux Corner to Sango border post, which is along the border boundary. Vegetation density. In many mine-affected areas, dense vegetation can obscure the presence of landmines and UXO, making it challenging for demining teams to locate and safely clear these hazards. For example, Bema Valley and Sheba Forest, thick bushes and forested region can hinder visibility and slow down the clearance process, and teams must carefully navigate through underbush to avoid accidents. Seasonal weather conditions. Zimbabwe experiences distinct wet and dry seasons, which can significantly impact terrain conditions. During the rain season, heavy rainfall can lead to mud and slippery conditions, e.g. in Dumisa, the Crux Corner to Sango border post minefield, where the National Mine Clearance Unit is currently working, making access to minefield more difficult. Flooding can also wash away mines, complicating clearance effort. Conversely, during the dry season, dust and dry soil can create visibility issues and increase the risk of wildfires, which can further endanger demining operations. Dry season also harden the ground, making it difficult for deminers to excavate the ground before watering the ground. Excessive temperatures. Excessive temperatures reduces the efficiency of demining teams. Deminers may experience fatigue more quickly, leading to decreased productivity and increased risk of errors during operations. This can prolong the time required to clear minefields, which is critical in areas where timely demining is essential for community safety along border boundaries. Accessibility to remote areas. Many minefields are located in remote and isolated regions, especially in border boundaries, which can be challenging to reach due to poor infrastructure. Unclear border demarcations. So due to passage of time, markings were vandalized and destroyed, so it will be difficult for operators or for demining teams to see where exactly the demarcation to see where exactly the demarcations for the borders are. So they have to enter through the other country borders so as to reach the area that they want to conduct demining operations. Good practices and innovations. Community involvement and awareness programs. Engaging local communities is crucial for successful mine action. Zimbabwe has implemented awareness programs to educate communities about the dangers of landmines and the importance of reporting suspected minefields. By involving local population in the demining process, teams can gain valuable insight into the location and ensure safer operations. This can be done on either side, from the Zimbabwean side, or else the team can go to the other side of the border, for example, the Mozambican border, and conduct those awarenesses. Partnership and information sharing between non-governmental organizations on both sides of the border. The demining operators has to partner and share information relating to demining issues from, for example, operators in Zimbabwe, they have to collaborate and share information with the other operators in the Mozambican side. Innovative clearance techniques. The adoption of new clearance techniques, such as mine detection dogs, the use of GPZ 7000 and advanced mechanical demining equipment, has improved efficiency and safety in mine clearance operation. The innovations allow for faster and more accurate identification of mines in Zimbabwe. This was initially in Mozambique. Apopo in Mozambique were using RAIDs. However, due to collaboration and information sharing, the information were passed in Zimbabwe, and in Zimbabwe adopted the use of MDD through the NPA. Inter-border coordination. In Zimbabwe, we have the Joint Permanent Commission on Defense and Security, whereby the government of Zimbabwe collaborate with the government of Mozambique, maybe discussing issues pertaining the minefields along the border boundaries, irregardless of their political instabilities or the conflict. Environmental considerations. Incorporating environmental considerations into mine action practices is becoming increasingly important by assessing the ecological impact of demining operations in Zimbabwe. Team can develop strategies that minimize harm to local ecosystem while actively clearing mines. Casualty evacuation. Casualty evacuation. This is through clearings of border of those minefields that are along border boundaries. People can easily access health facilities, maybe for casualty. For example, in Mozambique, they will be accessing health facilities in Karanda, when they were clearing at Mukumbura border boundaries. Cross-border victim assistance. As shown on the picture there, Allo Trust not only supported victims in Zimbabwe, but it also supported victims in Mozambican sides. Over and above, mine clearance in Zimbabwe not only protect lives, but also foster economic growth, community resilience, and environmental sustainability. I thank you.
Thank you very much, Captain Godwish. I think you gave a very sobering description of how daunting is the task for a country 45 years on, still burdened by the problem of mines. And I think among the many challenges that you have described and the successes, I think what we have to retain as well is the importance that you stressed about the predictability of funding. These are endeavors the last many years, and it needs to be done with some constants and some predictability. But my congratulations as well for the huge progress. Even if you have not, you have to postpone the deadline for complete full clearance of the mines. I think it's impressive, the challenges and the results that have been obtained in Zimbabwe. And now I would like to give the floor to our colleague Svenja Liu, which Program Officer for Policy and Research at the Geneva International Center for Humanitarian Demining, that will share with us some of the research done by your center on mine action in border areas. Please, Svenja.
Sorry, short people problems. All right. Thank you, everyone, and thank you, Alessandra, for that introduction. It's a real privilege for me to be here today speaking to you with such an esteemed panel of presenters. It's also wonderful to see a representative from a national authority who can give us real practical experiences and information about the needs and the challenges from country cases. So today I'm here to introduce a study by the GICHD on mine action in border areas. This study was also completed at the end of last year, around the same time as the ICRC study. I'll be giving a quick overview as well as some key findings from that study. Please allow me to start just by thanking the organizations and the institutions who provided information, expertise, and insights from their perspectives. You can see them all here on the slide above. I want to mention in particular Ecuador's National Center for Humanitarian Demining, CENDESMI, as well as the Peruvian Mine Action Coordination Center, Contraminas. Their support was really indispensable to carrying out this research. So why this study? My fellow panelists have already given really important insights into the importance, the relevance, and of course the many challenges associated with border contamination. Our study is really a first attempt to try to systematically map and to demonstrate the full extent of this problem worldwide, and to try and set a sort of shared understanding on the scope of this as an issue and what this means for the sector. We also explore successful cases, excuse me, and some of the lessons learned from these successful interventions, as well as exploring some of the longer-term positive implications of undertaking mine action in these areas. So before I get into the study, I will just go over some of the limitations and the challenges associated with this study. To begin with, there is no global consensus or definition on how we define a border area. For that reason, there is no shared understanding of how close contamination needs to be to the official demarcation of a border for us to consider it border contamination versus internal contamination. We've relied on the selected sources to distinguish border from internal contamination, and I'll go through that in more detail in our methodology. Similarly, our study does not intend to verify existence of border contamination. Again, we've relied on official sources for that. We focus on land borders in this study, so maritime contamination is out of the scope, and due to political sensitivities, things like intrastate borders, lines of contention, administrative lines, these are also out of the scope of the study. And finally, just to mention that we undertook field visits to the border of Peru and Ecuador. This was very vital for including information to the study. But of course, if it had been, and if time had permitted, further research into specific border areas would of course strengthen the scope, strengthen the findings of this study. So to begin with, the mapping exercise in particular included all affected states and territories. We've utilized 3 main sources to identify whether or not border contamination exists for particular states and territories. The first of these is extension requests under Article 5 of the Anti-Personnel Mine Ban Convention and Article 4 of the Convention on Cluster Munitions. We've also utilized transparency reports as well as official interventions that have been made in convention proceedings. And finally, we've utilized the landmine and cluster munition monitor. As you can imagine, this was the primary source of information that we utilized, in particular for non-state parties to those conventions. We've utilized 3 criteria to determine the existence of border contamination. The first of these is an explicit reference to the existence of border contamination in a particular state or territory. The second is the availability of maps that clearly show confirmed or suspected hazardous areas or recent accidents at the border. And the third is specific coordinates or details on the location of explosive ordnance contamination at the border. At least one of these criteria needed to be considered fulfilled for us to consider that a state or territory had border contamination. Where this one or more criteria were considered only partially fulfilled, we've designated this as potential border contamination. I'll go through a few examples of this. So here you can see an example of criteria 1, where there's an explicit reference to the K5 minefield along the Cambodian-Thai border. This was included in the extension request to the APMBC. Here you can see a map of the Republic of Iraq with very clear, in red, hazardous areas along multiple areas of that border. This was an extension request to the CCM. And finally, we can see here specific coordinates. This relates to Guinea-Bissau, where there is specific border contamination. Here you can see the results of this mapping exercise. In red are states and territories which have border contamination. In orange, potential border contamination. And in gray are states and territories that have some form of explosive ordnance contamination, but no border contamination. I think it's quite clear from this map that the majority of states and territories that have explosive ordnance contamination likely have some form of border contamination. Some key figures here. So out of 69 states and territories that were included in this study, 37 have border contamination, 18 potentially have border contamination, and just 14 do not have border contamination. This mapping exercise clearly demonstrates the widespread nature of this issue. It's important for our sector, I think, to see and to recognize this, especially because the majority of states that have some form of border contamination are also states parties to either the APMBC, the CCM, or to both of those conventions. And unfortunately, for many, border contamination does remain a challenge. This takes me over to the next section of our study. So beyond the mapping, the study has also looked into examples of successful mine action interventions that have occurred in different contexts. I think it won't come as a surprise to most of you in this room that coordination and cooperation between states and territories is absolutely vital for addressing border contamination. There are multiple cross-border coordination mechanisms that can facilitate this, including joint border commissions, memorandums of understanding, and peace agreements. All of these mechanisms will work differently depending on the context in which we're talking about, but in general, they will facilitate dialogue and agreement for mine action interventions. They help to ease legal and bureaucratic processes, which can take a very long time. They can support data and information sharing and enable synchronized operations, especially things like community liaison activities. Our study has also looked into cross-border interventions, not only clearance, but also importantly, coordinated risk education campaigns, as well as regional victim assistance facilities and programs. Many of these interventions are facilitated through vital activities such as information sharing. This has been mentioned already by members of the panel. Especially this is important where neighboring states and territories have information such as military maps on the types or the location of explosive ordnance contamination on the other side of the border. Shared regulations on access is also extremely important. We're talking about permits, shared medical evacuation procedures, and things like evacuation, which are extremely important, especially when we're talking about, for instance, difficult terrain, which we often see in border areas. Funding mechanisms that are focused specifically on border areas are also important, as are the use of platforms for regional cooperation. Finally, our study explores specific examples of the broader, longer-term impacts of mine action in border areas. Documenting and highlighting these impacts can help us to really make the case for why we need to be looking and prioritizing these complex areas. Mine action, as many will know, is an important part of peace-building efforts. It can help to improve trust, improve transparency between formerly conflicting states, and very importantly, it can help to reduce the longer-lasting impacts of war on border communities. When it comes to securing and increasing the safety of cross-border mobility and border management, mine action interventions can also be very important here. And as mentioned by Eric, there is also an importance here to start changing the discourse around the way we talk about border contamination and really emphasizing its presence as a threat rather than as a part of national security, which is unfortunately something from time to time we hear from states. There is a great example from a partnership between the UNDP and Turkey, where border clearance was undertaken as a part of a broader border management strategy. When it comes to productive use of land, trade, and upgraded infrastructure in general, we are talking about economic development for border communities, but of course there can also be broader impacts on regional and national levels, especially when we're talking about things like trade access routes, which can enable economic development at a high level. Environmental protection and rehabilitation, we've seen multiple examples where mine action interventions in border areas can help to support disaster risk reduction efforts, post-recovery efforts, as well as comprehensive regional conservation efforts. And this has happened on the Zimbabwe-Mozambique border, for instance. So what does this study leave us with? Of course, border areas are incredibly diverse. There is no really one-size-fits-all approach. We're talking about different histories of conflict, different political realities, and indeed different borders, from porous borders with a fluid flow of movement to heavily securitized and controlled borders. And all of these factors come together to mean that the challenges for border contamination can really diverge depending on the context in which we're talking about. However, there are some important entry points or first steps that can be taken. Information sharing, even on a very limited scale, can be a very useful first step for beginning interventions in border areas. Having platforms for dialogue, especially platforms that can last in the longer term, because in general we're talking about very long-term interventions, are very important, and coordinating risk education efforts as well, especially in situations where there are huge challenges for clearance. There's a need for sustained attention on this issue at the global and national levels. It was great, for instance, to see an inclusion, a reference to border contamination in the Siem Reap Action Plan last year. However, we also want to see inclusion of this particular issue in mine action strategies, in work plans, and other types of national documents to ensure that this issue is also factored into decision-making processes like prioritization. Sharing information and lessons learned is really vital to guiding these interventions and reducing the potential for things like bureaucratic setbacks, which unfortunately we see a lot of in these types of interventions. And finally, exploration and further funding is essential for this issue. As a sector, I think that we can also support this by demonstrating some of the longer-term positive impacts of addressing border contamination, not only for saving lives, but also for some of those shared objectives for peace, for development and for environmental protection. I'm going to stop there. Thank you so much, and looking forward to your questions.
Thank you very much, Svenja. And mindful of time, I give the floor directly to the next speaker, Axel Steen-Nielsen, Director of the Department for Mine Action and Disarmament and Norwegian People Aids, so that then we can save a few minutes for questions as well. Thank you very much.
Thank you, Alexandra. I do it like this. So yeah, I'll try to make it short. But thanks for the opportunity to speak on this very interesting topic. And MPA, we have experience doing border clearance in several places, reaching from the Balkans to South America, also in Southeast Asia and in Africa. So let me tell you about some of the examples. The one that you see in front of you now, it's from the Chile and Peru border, where they had an area that was clearly mined, and it was unclear if it was part of Chile or Peru. And before they could agree on the borders, they wanted this area demined, and they wanted a neutral third party to conduct that clearance operation. So they requested MPA if we could help them out with that, which we of course were able to. So we brought in deminers from Bosnia and Herzegovina that was able to conduct the clearance with great support from both Chile and Peru. We had both administrative support and operational support in terms of the machine was borrowed. We could borrow the machine from the Chilean army, and we were also able to get support for the medical support. So very, very good cooperation with a three-party memorandum of understanding that made this an excellent operation. And after the area was fully demined, the two countries could go in with like normal procedures and then agree on what should be the border between the two countries. Here we have another example still in Peru. Now it's the border of Peru and Ecuador. So this is a bit different because here they had been able to agree on the delineation of the borderline, but there was then some minefields that had been laid by the Ecuadorian side that was now inside Peru. So to be able to get those areas demined, they also set up a good cooperation mechanism where the Ecuadorians, they provided technical data, minefield maps to Peru. But there was a bit of a problem that they lacked some details, so the exact location of the minefields were not possible to determine just from the data that was made available. And MPA, we were asked to also support on this. So we went in and we did some assessment of what was available, and from that information we could also then assist in actually identifying the exact locations of those remaining 18 minefields, so that again Peru should now be able to clear those areas and hopefully be Article 5 compliant in the very near future. Here we see a bit of like the detail of the map that was presented, so you can understand that, yeah, it could be a bit of a struggle then to see exact locations when they didn't have the coordinates from it. Other examples between Croatia and Serbia, they wanted to establish a border crossing. But again, it was not possible at the time due to contamination issues. So again, MPA was asked by the two states if we could assist. And as MPA was present in both countries, it was quite convenient to use us as a neutral party to conduct the land release operations, as we could then use both assets from our Serbian program and the Croatian program. And we did that, and we set up a clearance plan that had to be approved by both the SMAC and CROMAC. And when we had kind of full agreement from all three parties again, we were able to conduct the necessary land release operations and could clear the contamination. Zimbabwe has also already been presented, but it's a good example again when you have two countries with Mozambique and Zimbabwe having good cooperation on government level and letting the relevant mine action authorities in both countries be involved in how we can agree on the operations, doing a joint survey and then see that, okay, this part of the minefield is in Zimbabwe, so it will be cleared by assets in Zimbabwe, and the other one in Mozambique, and they will be cleared by their side. So it's a very, very good cooperation, so congratulations on that, as already has been mentioned there. The last example is an ongoing case. We have the Thailand and the Cambodia border, which was also mentioned from extension requests. It is a very, very long border that has maybe one of the longest minefields ever produced, the K5 mine belt. So it's a massive task and very, very difficult on the border, as there is no agreed border delineation between the two countries for the moment. They have a border commission for how they are going to agree on the border, but it's very difficult, of course, to kind of do that in practical terms as long as most of the border remains contaminated. And here, MPA, we are again working in both Thailand and Cambodia. We have very good and close cooperation with the mine action authorities on both sides, and also with the Cambodian Mine Action Center as the biggest national operator in Cambodia. So we are working closely on both sides of the border, trying to also resolve the border problem, the contamination problem on the border there. But of course, it's still a big task that remains, and it has to be kind of more political work as well involved there, so that both sides can finally agree on how they want to do it. And it's very, very important now that they both are going to come with extension requests, that they have a good plan for how they're going to deal with this border problem. And hopefully the studies that have been mentioned here today will be some good tools for them that they can use to approach this. And hopefully, you know, that we will end with both countries becoming also Article 5 compliant in the near future. Thank you very much.
Thank you very much, Axel, and to all the speakers of the panel. I think we had a good balance between the description of policies, frameworks, good practice, and the reality on the field and how it's actually implemented and the challenges of it. We still have a few minutes left for questions. Please, if you take the floor, introduce yourself. Before the question. The floor is yours. Please. Let's take three questions and then we address the panel.
From Myanmar, MRCS President. So, very good panel discussion, very informative, and I learned a lot. My question would be more on her study on the mines. So you have been studying so many places, but have you also considered in some areas population density, but country-wise population density, if we go on to that, Asia, where there's huge populated countries like India, Bangladesh, Thai, all that, and also ASEAN, the group, if you total, it's highly populous. So if you have to pinch funds, you need to choose out of the major continents where you would concentrate on the mine issue.
Let's just, maybe we take another couple of questions, Mr. And then we come back. Please.
Hi, I'm Tamar Gabelnick. I'm director of the International Campaign to Ban Landmines Cluster Munition Coalition. Thank you so much for this presentation, and I just wanted to make one short comment and then a question. The comment is on the adding a couple of points to the lists of very, very good reasons that you gave for why it's important to clear border areas. Obviously starting with the safety of population, and couldn't agree more with what you're saying, that putting mines on a border does not make countries safer, it does not make the population safer, and we had to repeat that unfortunately a lot in the past few weeks and months. So there are two other reasons I think that might be more on the political side and maybe a bit more sensitive, but obviously states that are part of the Mine Ban Convention have an obligation to clear mined areas as soon as possible. And when the mined area is sort of delaying progress and reaching the goal of clearing as soon as possible, then that becomes problematic, especially in terms of considering extension requests. So it's basically, the point is that it's a legal obligation in some sense to clear those areas more quickly, especially if it's the last area. And another one on the political side is because it could be seen after a while as a violation of the first article of the Mine Ban Convention in terms of making use of mines that have already been laid, especially when mines on border areas where delineation has not taken place, and it's rather challenging for the state to move towards delineation. It could be that keeping them in place is convenient, or for other reasons. So I just want to put that out there. Sorry, I'm a bit grumpy. It's a difficult time for us in the campaign,
Yes.
but I just want to say it. So my question is, in your experience, because there's so many countries that have made enormous progress, and it's so good to hear, and it's great that you've done these studies, and the recommendations. Have there been other situations where the border wasn't delineated and it took some political work? Because we're hearing about a lot of collaboration. I didn't really realize about the Peru-Chile situation, where the clearance happened and then the delineation happened. In your experience on the panel, have you been in a case where you had to work with the governments and really push them towards that, let's first delineate and then we can work out, let's first clear and then we can work out the delineation afterwards? It'd be nice to hear how that process took place. Thank you.
Thank you very much. Please.
Hi, good afternoon. I am NPA's country director, but I'm just now sharing some commentaries from the Peruvian delegation, Contraminas and Minister of Defense. So as it comes to the cooperation, the South-South cooperation and the good practices between Peru and Ecuador, both countries have been implementing joint efforts in terms of humanitarian demining, training, information exchange, knowledge and experience that they gained while fulfilling their obligation with the Ottawa Convention. These joint efforts and this joint work shared between the Peruvian Army and the Ecuadorian Army are themselves the good example or the best example for the application of a trust, of the trust between the two countries. This kind of trust measure has no previous example, because it's something really that doesn't allow just the two countries to fulfill their obligations to the convention, but also it's really related and very much related with the execution and implementation of the peace agreements in 1998, signed by both countries in 1998, so with reference with something that was mentioned before. And finally, these humanitarian demining, joint humanitarian demining is something that really innovative, considering that 30 years before, I mean, between Peru and Ecuador, there was an international armed conflict, and while currently they are implementing joint efforts in order to obtain, in order to pursue sustainable peace. And finally, the mentioned initiatives are a good example, or maybe the best example, of the commitment of both countries in terms of humanitarian demining, and the aim of this commitment is to strengthen the integration process in terms of security and defense, as well as to increase the mutual trust and the mutual cooperation, being an example of South-South cooperation and regional cooperation. So this is the Peruvian delegation contribution to the reflection shared during this presentation.
Thank you very much for sharing this. Before going back to the floor, maybe we start with a question from the president of the Myanmar Red Cross about criteria linked or not to population density.
Thank you. Thank you so much for this question. I think it's a really important point, the point on population density, which indeed we haven't included as a part of this study. The safety of populations, no matter whether we're talking about border areas or not, is always going to be the #1 factor, the most paramount factor when we're talking about how to prioritize mine action interventions. Indeed, looking at population density is an extremely important factor for understanding where we need to prioritize these efforts. I would say that for sure in some areas we're seeing very dense populations in border areas, but there are also many border areas where communities that are affected by explosive ordnance contamination are in fact very isolated and in some cases quite sparse. And unfortunately this does contribute to one of the factors as to why border areas are not necessarily prioritized by all national authorities in those countries. So it's definitely something that needs to be looked at, and not something that we've included in the study, but a very good point.
But you also should consider whether the country is industrialized or mainly agricultural.
Yes, absolutely. Thank you.
Thank you very much. And then there is a very interesting question about, can you share experience of when actually states had to be sort of convinced, pushed, incentivized to take into consideration cross-border demining because it was not their priority. Can anyone, I don't know who's the best, who volunteers to answer?
Thank you. Thank you, Alessandra. Thank you so much, Tamara, for that question. I would like to step back a little bit on that question first, because, I mean, there are some misconceptions out there that we see is that anti-personnel mines or mines in general are making borders safer. The ICRC, 2 decades ago, we hosted meetings with military experts from around the world and made a study that has been widely published called the Friend or Foe study, which discusses this issue. That was 2 decades ago. Today, we are in the 21st century, and there's been a certain development in terms of military utilities, and what we have done is to encourage states to look at alternatives, because you have, of course, new sensor systems out there, which is not just more efficient, but is more in line with obligations of states to legal instruments such as the Mine Ban Convention, the Convention on Cluster Munitions, but also in general on IHL. So that's the first part. Also, I think on that, we have, of course, the the mechanisms under Protocol 5, under the APMVC, and Protocol 4 and the CCM that was mentioned here. But there's also the fact of working on capacity building. And this is not something new, and it's not unique for the sector of mine action, right? This is something we do in all sectors. So instead of coming in and pointing fingers at nation states and saying, you have to do, maybe we can go and say, we can offer support. We can bring you up to speed. We can give you advice. We can perhaps help you financially. We can help you with technical advice. And I think the example that Axel gave for instance, the border between Chile and Peru is a really good one, where this exactly was done, because I had a chance to visit that border before the MPA program, and I remember very well having really rich discussions on you know, all these excuses why this was not possible. But we saw here in this presentation that it was possible. It was quite straightforward, and what was done was to think out of the box. So thank you for that.
Thank you very much. I hear they call us to the reception. I don't know if there is any other pressing question from the floor before we release you. So I really want to, sorry, please.
Sorry, I don't want to hold up the reception here. That's horrible. But I just wanted to say just a few words, just a comment, because I did work with the Organization of American States 20 years ago and worked with Peru and Ecuador, and it was a clear that it is a confidence and security building measure, mine action. So it's really important to consider that. As was mentioned, I think, by Axel, there was a benefit there that there was no delimitation issue. And that's a big deal. So Peru and Ecuador had a demarcation issue, and they went ahead and did a good job and continue to do a good joint demining job. With other areas, I think it's a bit more complex. I mean, we hope that the delimitation of a border doesn't trump the humanitarian imperative of going to do demining and clear the area, and that's why the work that MPA did on the border with Chile and Peru was a very good example of that, because both states agreed on the entity that would do that clearance. The one thing I'd like to say is, in the case of Zimbabwe and Mozambique, it's also a false sense of security. If you say Mozambique is free of mines, these borders are very transited. So once you say it's free of mines, you will give the population a false sense of security that they can just move wherever they want. And right across the border, there's mines. So with countries that have a minefield between them, it's important that they declare they're very cautious of what they tell their population of what's taken place, and that they continue with mine risk education in those areas as long as the other side of the border is not clear. So I think that's important to consider. Thank you.
Thank you very much. And yes, we probably did not mention enough mine awareness, mine risk education. It was maybe not the top topic of the session, but I think this is definitely one of the things we need to look carefully and make sure that in these very challenging times that we have in front of us, we continue to dedicate sufficient resources as well to mine risk education. And with this, I really want to warmly thank our panelists, Eric, first of all, my colleagues as well for organizing this, and Captain Godwish from Zimbabwe, Svenja Liu from the Geneva International Center for Humanitarian Demining, and finally, Axel Sven Nielsen, Director of the Department for Mine Action and Disarmament at the Norwegian People Aid. And to all of you for having attended this session, thank you very much, and please enjoy the reception.